If you run a company or manage a team, hiring qualified people quickly can make or break your business. Imagine a position of need going unfilled for weeks or even months because you just can't seem to find the right candidate. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. Indeed sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so you can reach the people you want faster. This makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Plus, there's no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts. You only pay for results on your job post. Just in the last minute that I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. Now that is fast. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. Listeners will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/BWN. Go to Indeed.com/BWN right now to support this podcast. Indeed.com/BWN. Terms and conditions apply.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Sunday night, January 26th, 2025, as we bring you this new episode. This past weekend was SoxFest Live, held at the Remova Theater in the Bridgeport neighborhood of Chicago. Remova should sound familiar to White Sox fans, and especially Sox Machine fans, as that's where we held our opening day eve show last year. The White Sox put on a show at Remova over 2 days. You can read my full review on SoxMachine.com. In this episode, we'll share what we learned from SoxFest, from the players and White Sox personnel, and take a look at the non-roster invitees to spring training camp. Which NRIs have the best shot of making the opening day roster? Let's get started. Jim Margulis has this episode off, so it's the Sox Machine beat reporter and I, James Fegan. And James, what did you think about SoxFest?
It got me almost, well, it didn't give me as much material as past SoxFest did. Late January, often covering a rebuilding team, I try to stretch SoxFest out for 2-3 weeks of stories of quotes, basically takes me to spring training. And the fewer number of panels, the less audience interaction for less newsworthy moments of really top decision makers having to address things that maybe they haven't addressed to us up to that point. I feel like it was lesser than, but to kind of see an effort to really engage a fan base that I feel like the Sox have been avoiding almost, even if there are reasons beyond it. It was just, even 2023, even in seasons where they're trying to contend, it seemed like they were more trying to get by without having to face how the public felt about Tony La Russa in person, or having to rebuild again in person, or addressing a lot of things that have been going on the last couple of years. This obviously still wasn't a great season to type of do a publicity tour about. But it did seem like it, and there's some choppy moments of SoxFest where you see Jay Reinsdorf come on the balcony and some fans seeing there yelling "sell the team," or the weirdness of not taking questions from the audience. And then what I felt was like a good instinct from John Triffin to try to engage a audience that was maybe like checking out a bit to take questions, but obviously because it wasn't something organized, kind of a disjointed application of it. It seemed like the first step towards trying to re-engage with the public a bit more. And I think it's the fact that they did this and then had these State of the Sox events reflect that they are starting to feel like their process is one they feel comfortable talking about the fan base of, but they obviously don't have a work product to really say, here's something to get excited about. I thought the surprise instance, especially since I was bumping into I've interacted with the Schultz camp before, and they're very proud of their guy a lot, but they've acknowledged like he hasn't someone that you've seen talk in public a lot up to this point, and it's because he's still 21 years old. A lot of the hubbub around him was when he was still a teenager. He owned that last panel. Like they were eating out of his hands. Like everything he said was getting cheers.
Yeah.
He said like I'm from Oswego, and like it got like a huge boom in the crowd. So like I know you're going to talk a little bit about Braden Montgomery being a fan favorite later on. And he's very built for the camera and like a very upbeat person. So I agree with you on that. But like the crowd is ready to love the local kid and no Schultz. So I thought that was an interesting final stretch of that. I thought the level of enthusiasm for the prospects themselves, maybe not a marketing campaign built around like ignore this year, their prospects coming. But I felt the affection that the fan base had for the prospects themselves was interesting to see. Like they're ready to be excited by new players. They just don't want that to be sold to them as like this is all. If this is in place, you don't have to care about anything else. So
Yeah.
I think Jim has hinted at it, and you talked about it in your article that ran on Sunday. Just like it is still a fan base. They are like as cranky as they are, as like misanthropic as they can feel at times. They're ready and waiting to be excited about something. It's just not wanting to be tricked by something they've been tricked by before.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And with Noah Schultz, like there was a question on that panel that Connor McKnight hosted with the prospects, like, what is your most memorable baseball moment? And it was cool that he mentioned helping the Birmingham Barons win the Southern League Championship. And I feel like that was also a missed opportunity by the White Sox when people ask, like, what's the plan here? What should I look forward to? That should have been one of the first things that Chris Getz said. Be like, hey, man, we just won the AA championship in the Southern League. Like, our prospects are playing good baseball, and they're coming up soon. But it was only Noah Schultz that mentioned that the Birmingham Barons won the AA championship.
Like, even if like Getz saying it like comes off a little bit like, hey, please look at our minors. I think it should have been. I think that and like some of the Kannapolis, like the walk-off they had to get into the finals of the playoffs, like that should have been part of like the video packages because that's really exciting, like cathartic video. And I think DJ Gladney and Ace Product hitting a walk-off single to win a championship, like that's something they could have. Obviously, they're using a lot of major league highlights, but or maybe focusing on their bigger prospects and showing you Hagen Smith highlights up. But like that's like the best moment in White Sox like on-field action all last season. So yeah, I felt like they could have involved that a bit more.
So what did we learn from SoxFest? Well, in SoxFest, there's always the opportunity for the media to ask direct questions to Chris Getz and Will Venable. You've seen some of our videos on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. Especially James asked an excellent question to Chris Getz, like, how would you sell fans on 2025? You could check out that video. You'd also see the opening statements heading to spring training from both Getz and new White Sox manager Will Venable. But the number one bullet point for SoxFest that kind of snuck up on us, James, because not even Chris Getz mentioned it in the day before in his opening presser, was Drew Thorpe, and he suffered a setback in his rehab from injury. What do we know, or what did Drew tell you about his injury?
So it's funny because not funny, the injury, but when we're in it's the media availability for players before SoxFest is literally just like all the players just get like let loose in a room, kind of like putting a bunch of mice into like the terrarium with a snake situation. You just have to like go and grab them as they're milling around. And so we're talking to Braden Montgomery, and you've got your camera set up, and we're both like giving him like the standard reporter space. And I realize that I'm basically standing back to back with Drew Thorpe, who's on camera with another interview with Josh Fryman. And I'm hearing, like, I'm trying to listen to Braden Montgomery and ask him questions, and I'm hearing Drew Sport describe like this discomfort in his elbow. And I'm like, huh, like my reporter brain is just like, it's hard to focus with that. But I, found Drew separately, and he was talking about he hasn't really gotten a chance to ramp up because he was feeling the discomfort still in his arm once he started to try and throw again after the surgery for the bone spur. But he had just gotten the cortisone shot like literally Friday. So the projection like officially is like, oh, it's going to put him behind a little bit, but he's going to throw next week. And if he starts throwing next week, that could put him on hand where he would theoretically start. He's not going to be in the first series, but possibly in that first weekend of the season. But it's really, and he acknowledges much like, we're making these time projections based off high response to a cortisone shot that I literally just got. So like we have really no information about how the feeling's gonna respond. Like as far as like testing the throwing and like if the feeling's gone away, there's no data on there. Like he said he got an MRI and there's no issues, and so theoretically there's no new injury or no big setback that no like new tear or any new like inflammation from the bone spur that indicates a set period of time that sets them out. It's just like, all right, well, you're feeling this. We're doing this to address your feeling, and then you can start ramping up again if the feeling or discomfort doesn't recur. But there's no real information about like what's it felt like the first time he's thrown since the cortisone shot because it literally just happened. So um, based on what we've heard as far as like the ideal timeline, it's not really a significant setback. Like maybe you think Drew Thorpe, depending on spring training goes, is in the second series anyway, making a start. But it's so speculative at this point because there's no test, there's no first time throwing, first time off a mound. None of that stuff has happened yet to really know like how his elbow is going to respond. He's been told at least that like this is obviously something that can happen. Obviously, it's something that can happen because it has, but it theoretically isn't a big deal. But like the error bars at this point are too big to really have confidence. Like, all right, for sure, he's starting the fourth game of the season.
Yeah, it really depends in how much action that he gets in spring training, right? Because if he has another setback or he still feels discomfort, even when you get there, James, at the beginning of spring training, and if he doesn't get the ball and really start ramping up until early mid-March, I mean, that impacts the timetable for Thorpe making his introduction to 2025, right? Like, I think the hope is that he'd be ready to go at season start, maybe not for that opening series, but for the second series. That's still the hope for the Chicago White Sox. But I guess it really just depends on when he starts up at spring training. That's going to be one of the storylines as you get there in Arizona is Drew Thorpe throwing and how does he feel?
Right. And once spring training starts, that's when you really start to like separate like whether he's behind. I feel since that's kind of the set time where the pitchers need to be hitting blocks really clearly to be part of your opening day rotation. I also like not to sound like a baseball executive talking about abundance of caution, but like if this is 2031 and the White Sox need to like win every series they can to win the AL Central, maybe you as soon as your mid-rotation starter says he's ready, you throw him in because you need him. This is not that situation. If there's, I think probably Chris Getz or Josh Barfield or Will Venable are in the mode of, and I've heard Kenny Williams talk about this in the past of just like certain guys or certain situations where like it's not a need, like let's just give him another week because why not? I think you're in a situation where as far as like what Drew Thorpe means to your future, what this current season means, you're probably delaying it or slow playing it an extra week or two just because why would you not do that in this case? Like pushing Drew Thorpe back early in April of 2025, it's just like no purpose to the White Sox whatsoever. And that's before you even get into the fact that like theoretically, granted they have to get through spring training healthy and looking effective as well, but you got Martin Perez, you got you got Bryce Wilson, you got Jonathan Cannon, Davis Martin, Sean Burke. You have a guys that you would feel like are a good use of your time or someone you feel good about, throwing in the starting rotation, five of them without Drew Thorpe. And that doesn't even account for, say, like, hey, Kai Bush looked really good in spring and he's healthy and he's throwing 93, 95 again. What's the harm in having him, make a month of starts and we slow play Drew or make sure he's back and give him a couple AAA rehab starts and not push it. So not like the White Sox are, I don't think they're even going to be in the top half of the league in terms of starting pitching performance. It'd be great if they did that, but I think there's a volume of like guys that you can go to and say like, this isn't a bad use of our time to have them start in the majors where they have a little bit of layering to not push Drew Thorpe at all, and I don't think they will.
Another pitcher, you talked about how the Oswego crowd was very pro Noah Schultz and very proud of Noah Schultz. You have an upcoming story for SoxMachine.com as you got a chance to sit down with Noah Schultz. He's 6'10 now, and we've been speculating like how many innings. It sounds like the target is 110 innings. After you got a chance to talk to Noah, what's his confidence level at as far as his next level of development in 2025?
I would say it's pretty confident. I think he knows he could get his way to the majors this year. I think from the innings allotment they've talked about, it's probably very of the Brian Bannister mold of, he makes starts and then he maybe finishes the final month in the bullpen if he does make it to Chicago. But, the major project or concern about him last year was like the fastball, whiff rate, and he, adapted pretty quickly to throwing a four seamer more and having it be pretty effective. And he talked to me a little bit about how he can see kind of the approach angle on that pitch really having an effect and throwing guys off because he comes to the low slot with it. And, the it's funny because I talked to him a little bit about it. Like he's 6'10", and probably one of his present strengths is command, or just at least filling the zone. At this point, the questions are more about fastball playability or changeup, but typically the long lever guy, you think in terms of like how will he ever get him to throw strikes, and that's probably one of his strengths right now. So I remember when he first got drafted, interviewing a lot of people who coached with him, and one of them was Mark Sheehan, who he worked with, a youth coach here, and it was a lot of like Tom House school of thought. Descriptions of how to bring up a young athlete, how to keep them coordinated as their bodies are going through different changes, and what you do to make their delivery repeatable. And it sounded like a lot of like, fancy talk at the time, but also as a reporter, like, I don't know enough about pitching development to know whether I'm getting taken for a ride by somebody who uses lots of fancy lingo or somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. And I think Schultz has kind of proven, the level of coordination that he's shown in his delivery, that like, a lot of stuff that worked. And he was kind of joking, like Sheehan was somebody who really guided him through when he grew like 13 inches in 2 years. And he kind of is still in contact with him. Compared to what he did to keep his delivery intact during that period, he felt like growing an inch was like, I barely even felt it. I didn't even notice it. I didn't see any effects on his delivery. So it's really about pitch mix for him, even as he's still growing, he feels. And so his slider is clearly presently plus. He's, showing the ability to command two different fastballs. And the big thing he's working on with his changeup. And, something that applies to Hagen Smith as well is that you got these guys who are really great at, ripping off breaking balls and the kind of rotation your wrist that goes with it. Throwing a changeup the typical way where you kind of pronate it is the opposite thing. So they're trying to find ways for both those guys to throw changeups that don't ask them to do that. And so he's working on this kind of seam shifting changeup that, Bannister worked on with guys like Jake Ear, who lauded it, but obviously had different issues that were holding him back performance-wise last year. And Sean Burke, who you really saw kind of shine at the last end of the year. Somebody who had the four-seam fastball and two different really spinny breaking balls, but couldn't master a changeup. And that was, the version that clicked with him. Schultz has kind of learned something similar, and he felt like it was going pretty well. And that will obviously be a big separator as he's facing teams that he can't just overwhelm with a slider as he gets into AAA and the majors. So he seemed pretty optimistic about that. He also seems pretty optimistic in general. And after, having SoxFest crowd eating out of his hand, I assume it was his confidence level will be pretty high going to Arizona.
Flex your business with an American Express Business Gold Card. You'll earn 4 times membership rewards points on your top 2 eligible spending categories, like transit and electronics, each month, on up to $150K in combined purchases per year. Plus, you can now earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold, built for business by American Express.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
You mentioned Hagen Smith, and speaking of pitch mix, Hagen has an arsenal of pitches, it sounds like, that we may see, especially in spring training and during the minor leagues. Of course, he's fastball, slider. You've seen the highlights in Sox Machine. I cut that together throughout his starts at Arkansas last year, leading up to the MLB draft, leading up to the White Sox, selecting Hagen Smith in the first round. That slider can be devastating. The fastball velocity is premium for a left-handed starter. He's been working on a changeup. He's been working on a splitter. But he told us, James, in that media scrum at SoxFest, he's starting to feel like the cutter is his best pitch. And as soon as he mentioned that, it's like, okay, that was a pitch kind of out of nowhere for Garrett Crochet, and that became a really lethal pitch for Garrett Crochet. So I guess that's going to be something to watch for early on with Hagen Smith is this cutter, because I didn't see a lot of the cutter at Arkansas. So this is going to be a brand new pitch even to me after watching many of Hagen Smith's starts last year.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that Bannister kind of talked about when they drafted Smith, and also with Schultz is like, hey, if this guy can spin, and also with Crochet last year, like if this guy can spin a slider pretty good, he's going to be able to learn a cutter pretty easily. And if this guy is mid to high 90s with his four-seamer and throwing a high 80s slider, that's something where the cutter is going to be kind of a bridge pitch between them, but it's also going to be a really nasty, like low 90s pitch. So if that's something he can get significant movement on, given how sweepy his slider was, despite being very hard, yeah, that maybe that's something that looks a lot like Crochet. I also think Schultz and Smith, as much as we talked about them about third and fourth pitches, and that's the way things kind of go when you're interviewing starting prospects. They're always working at that third and fourth pitch. Smith and Schultz are really guys that you could really see them dominating on a given night, certainly certain lineups with two pitches. And especially if Smith is like starting out, I bet he probably starts in Double-A. But I think even at that level, I think it'll be a little bit like if he's using his cutter or he's using his splitter, it's kind of because he's working on it. That's a level I think somebody who's been as dominant as him, playing a pretty good conference, I think he could probably get by a Double-A with two pitches. But it stands to reason this is maybe a year where if they're not really trying to rush in the majors, and they're certainly not trying to rush them, but is going to have limited reps in the majors. I think it's an opportunity for him to really establish what he wants as new pitch mix to me. And certainly, maybe the cutter really takes more of a leap when he gets reassigned to minor league camp and isn't trying to impress everyone as much as he probably will be in his first go round. But this is kind of the year to really install that in a probably lowest pressure environment professionally he's going to have.
So the cutter, we used to joke back in the day, Coop will fix him. Just teach the White Sox pitcher how to throw a cutter. Is that back in vogue, James, with Brian Bannister? Is that going to be a thing again for White Sox pitchers? Be like, oh, we'll just teach him how to throw a cutter.
It's fun. Yes and no. It does seem like a big thing that's like, because I feel like Coop was finding a lot of guys whose fastballs weren't really, enough or not playing. For whatever reason, we thought fastballs were not playing. I don't think we knew about shape and vertical movement back then so much, and giving them kind of a variant that allowed them to get a lot of weak contact. Whereas now we're in an age of like, hey, we already have the fastest breaking balls like known to man or the world has ever seen being thrown on a regular basis. How do we get a supercharged version of that? It's like, well, we can get basically fastball velo from the 2000s on a pitch that moves a lot, and it's kind of this pursuit for the nastiest, hardest breaking ball. Whereas I felt like back, and it's reaching us back cyclically to 20 years ago. What was a nice little fastball variant to squeeze a weak contact pitcher out of somebody who was floating around on the bargain bin that the White Sox were able to capitalize on. So it's using the old tools in a new way to represent the acceleration of pitching and velocity now at present in this era.
And I got a chance to ask Hagen Smith what was it like to face Braden Montgomery. Hagen, to brag on his behalf, struck out Braden Montgomery 3 times in that matchup between Arkansas and Texas A&M last year. And I got a chance to ask Braden Montgomery that question, and he said he's pretty good. He didn't want to go into detail of that bad night against Hagen Smith, but getting a chance to talk to Braden Montgomery, this is someone, James, that has a lot of confidence in himself. And you are asking some very technical questions, especially when it comes to the pitching machines and even participating in the hitting lab.
Who, me?
Yeah, I know. Out of all people, at Texas A&M, for the longest of time, especially with recent White Sox hitters, Eloy was famous for this, where he didn't really want to know. And Luis Robert is still to this day, until we learn differently at spring training when he gets a chance to talk to you about, I just want to know how hard a guy throws. Like what pitches, what's the speed, that's it. And I just go up to the bat, to the plate and swing away against this guy. And because things are so technical on the pitching side, that's why pitchers are dominating today, because they're just taking advantage of, I'm not going to say it's a lazy effort, but for hitters, they can just be, there could be too much information and analysis paralysis type of situation. So that's why they just want to rely on their instincts, because it helped them carry this far to where they're at professional baseball. But Braden is part of this new generation of hitters, especially in the college front, where all these top universities not only have a pitching lab, but now they have a hitting lab to help their hitters counter against what other top programs are developing with their pitchers out of their pitching labs. And it's quite interesting on that level. And I feel like Major League Baseball is starting to catch up in that area. And the first opportunity that we get the chance to cover the White Sox of someone that's been through this environment is Braden Montgomery. And James, he seems to be really open arms, especially with the new technology that the White Sox are to be introducing that he's already gotten used to with his use at Texas A&M.
Yeah, so I feel like part of the magic of Eloy, and I know like we associate him with his major league career and how disappointing it was to this point, but it's small potatoes, but like watching him in the minor leagues in person, it's still just like one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And I think that a lot of the approach with him was like, this guy was, it was a plus hit tool. It was not just like a power prospect. Like this was somebody who, Menachino said, and wasn't just hitting Coach Blather, was something other scouts said, like this was somebody who was supposed to hit 300 annually. Like it was that level of field to hit. And something Menachino often said about him is that he could control the depth of the baseball. He was so instinctual about like when he wanted to catch a ball out front, when a ball was suited to really do that and pull, and when to stay back on something and spray it to different fields, and just had like this instinctual feel for like where he wanted his contact point to be, which has made it so hard to really kind of give him the framework when it came off and he was hitting so many ground balls. It's like this was just not something he had to gear his game around so much. Like it was very much like this guy is just so strong. It's 80 raw. It's probably going to play a little bit less than that because like we don't want to take him out of this kind of like pure hitter mode because it's so beneficial and the power is just going to come because he's got so much natural pop. Braden Montgomery is somebody who's kind of already in college gone through this process of shifting from, and this is something Ryan Fuller was talking about, is that viewing him in at Stanford he's really like more like that, whereas like this is a guy who really hit well in high school. It was kind of just like let him go. He's got natural pop. He's going to hit homers, but like not gear it. What changed when he went to Texas A&M is he became like very just power oriented. Like let's max this out. From that perspective, like maybe there's not as much room to get him to produce more power or untapped upside. At the same time, he hit 27 home runs in 61 games last year. So if he doesn't untap more, it's fine. It's more about maintaining what he's getting. But his approach became very much just like, what can I do damage on? And I'm going to explode on that. And so it's very like getting very persnickety about what his pitch selection was. And so he dove really into, there was an eye pitch at Texas A&M. He's worked a little bit on traject now because I know he trains out in Tomball, Texas, the home of Jimmy Butler. That's where his private hitting coach is, and the White Sox are going to have traject in spring training, so he's looking kind of forward to that. His approach has become very much like, I'm going to have a couple zones that I'm hunting, and if I see it, I'm going to explode. And so he's gotten very like into the detail of like what he's looking for, what it looks like, and wanting to hunt a specific area, as opposed to just being like, I've got this natural tool for hitting, I've got the bat speed to cover anything, I'm going up there, I'm reacting. The way that, Eloy was so successful up early in his career, and the way Luis Robert is still, when he's rolling, most comfortable doing is very much like, no one can blow me away. I know that I'm just going to be on field. And like, there are great moments when they're really locked in. And I think one of the reasons that Luis's injuries have really hampered him so much is like, he needs to just be playing every day to have that level of feel. He can't miss 2 weeks and come back in his first game and just like, that's a slider and react to it. But when he's on, he can do that. Some of the biggest, I know I'm just going to think of times in Target Field, but like the grand slam he hit off of Sonny Gray, I want to say it was in 2022. It was a full count slider, but I asked him, like, are you sitting on that at all? He's like, no chance. I remember that he answered that question in English. It's just like, when I'm rolling, I see a slider, I react. Like, I don't have any notion that's coming. I'm not guessing on the pitches in the count. I'm literally just seeing it. The same thing when he hit a first pitch, Yohan Duran, a curveball out. It's like, this is a guy who throws 102. You got to be geared up for that. How the heck did you get a first pitch curveball and hit it? It's just like, when I'm good, I see it and I react. So he feels like that's like the mode I have to be in because that's like the greatest potential. Whereas Braden's been already in a situation where the strikeouts were elevated early in his career, or just, he didn't feel like he was getting everything out of it, and he was moving the SEC, or just had more access to this data, has normalized him a bit more, and using this type of training where he's already kind of in this mode of like, it's a plus power tool. I'm trying to get everything out of it. Does that mean he's better suited to kind of deal with what the demands are going to be thrown to him? Or does that mean he's kind of a little bit ahead in terms of his development, but maybe we're not going to see that growth that we want to see? I don't know. It kind of remains to be seen. And we're kind of seeing this new generation, as you said, for the first time, really see how being exposed to this level of kind of professional training is going to apply when they're at the highest level. But it's a curious test case to me, especially given that we've watched so much of kind of the different versions, the different side of this. Does it mean Braden's kind of got this head start, or does it mean he just kind of did this in a different order? Interesting to see. Obviously, it'd probably be more fun if it's the version where he has a head start and, is ahead of the game forever.
Yeah, I could see him really having a hot start in 2025 in the minor leagues, especially if he starts at Winston-Salem in high A. With Braden, again, all of these young prospects, they have really good personalities. I think they're going to be very media friendly, which is great news for James, covering the team and trying to get stories. Nobody is too shy away from the camera, which is cool. Braden's got, I think, a great personality. Like, I think he's got an opportunity. I mean, White Sox fans are so starved to see a quality right fielder, James. And we haven't talked about like the throwing arm strength of Braden Montgomery. I mentioned in my draft coverage, I think it's an 80 grade arm. He used to be a pitcher that threw in the high 90s, and you could definitely see it that when he gets into position and he launches it, he's got an elite throwing arm. He is limited mobility-wise, but the White Sox are going to try to see if he can stick in center field. And maybe after his injury with his rehab work, he still has the range and give some people the confidence he could play in center field. But if he mashes and he's making great throws from right field, there's your hope, James, right? White Sox fans are going to attach a lot of hope to Braden Montgomery. Did we finally figure out right field? So I'm like, I find myself rooting for Braden Montgomery. Like, get hot, stay hot, get to the major leagues, get hot, make a great first impression. Because then that's where I think that's a turning point for White Sox fans. Be like, yes, finally, the White Sox have a really good right fielder, and he's very friendly, and he's got a great personality. And I know everyone's trying to find someone to root for in an upcoming White Sox roster. And you got Noah Schultz if you're somebody local, and if you want maybe someone like a budding superstar, it could be somebody like Braden Montgomery. He certainly has the tools and I think the personality to be someone nationally known.
The White Sox famously love Stanford products. Toolsy outfielders who went to Stanford. They embraced them and their personality wholeheartedly.
Joe Borchard. Was Kenny Williams an outfielder?
Yes, that was mostly the joke I was making.
Someone that White Sox fans are very hopeful for, gets off to a hot start, a better start than he did last year, but he did finish very well, is Colson Montgomery. And getting a chance to chat with Colson Montgomery in that media scrum, James, I found it not necessarily eye-opening, but he was pretty open about, last year was not great for me. But I figured out and changed my mindset at the end of the year when I knew I was going to the Arizona Fall League, that I'm just going to crush the Arizona Fall League. And he did finish strong in Charlotte in that last month, and he did crush in the Arizona Fall League, and he feels that change in mindset. He's got to carry that with him to camp, and it's going to produce better results in 2025. But the fact that Chris Getz still hasn't, and it sounds like he's not planning on signing a veteran free agent shortstop to compete against Colson Montgomery or Brooks Baldwin or Josh Rojas or even Chase Mydroth at the shortstop position. Is Colson Montgomery the favorite right now to be the opening day shortstop with what the White Sox have on hand?
So we were there. We asked Chris Getz on Friday, basically like, what's the shortstop depth chart? And he didn't give the position to Colson Montgomery, but the competition he listed was like, hey, Josh Rojas has played there. Chase Mydroth has played there. We got Brooks Baldwin. Um, and so Rojas has played there, it's true, but he's mostly played second or third sense, and probably we consider him a utility man would be a fair description. You could call him a super utility man if you're trying to compliment him. He could be, a Tony La Russa style utility man where you talk about Larry Garcia is not a utility man. He plays every day. He just doesn't play the same position. Josh Rojas could be that, but what he's not is an everyday shortstop. That's not what he was signed to do. Chase Mydroth can't play short. We talked to him on Friday. He made it clear that most of his time has been at second base. He'll play short if you ask. That's part of his utility. He's used to a roster, but what he's not being pegged as is this could be our everyday shortstop. That's not the ideal future for Chase Mydroth. Chase Mydroth becomes an everyday guy. It's probably at second more than anywhere else. Brooks Baldwin was a great shortstop for the Birmingham Barons last year. But one thing they did, especially when they promoted Jacob Gonzalez to Birmingham while Brooks was still there, is said, you know how you're going to make the majors? You're going to play a bunch of different positions. And Brooks said, okay. So I think the ideal thing, maybe if Brooks becomes an everyday player, maybe it's shortstop, there's a chance. But what they've already told him is like, all right, what we really think of you is like a really good utility player, ideally. None of these guys are like none of these guys are like incompetent. There's one person in that pool that they think maybe is our starting shortstop in 2030 right now. It's Colson Montgomery. So yeah, he could struggle in spring. He could look not ready. He could still look limited in what areas where he really does damage in the zone. But like, there's no one else in that group that's supposed to win that job long term, other than Colson Montgomery. He might not win it. He might not win the battle in March, but he's designed to win the war. Like that's the plan. So yeah, I think he's the favorite. I think he's the preferred option. He's also like, it's almost designed to win. Like if this season will be like, even if he doesn't play that great in AAA, I feel like they're halfway through. They're kind of like, we need to just figure out what Colson has and play him at shortstop. He's supposed to be our everyday shortstop. Let's do it. So it's a race designed for him to win. It's mostly just a question of how soon do they call it off because he's clinched it.
So I joined our friends from the 108. They had a SoxFest live post party at Reggie's from the 108 live show on Saturday night. They brought me out stage along with White Sox TV play-by-play announcer John Schriffett. He was there to ask for our bold predictions in 2025. I didn't feel like it was a bold enough prediction, but I did go on stage and say that I believe that Colson Montgomery will be the opening day shortstop for the Chicago White Sox at that show, James. And it goes back to the CBA, and remind me if I'm wrong, Colson Montgomery does qualify that if he does play well for the Chicago White Sox, and let's say he crushes in 2025, and he wins American League Rookie of the Year, the White Sox can gain an extra first-round pick in 2026, right?
Yes, they can. That's something that was discussed when I remember writing the story about that last spring training, about whether or not the PPI would be a consideration of the position battle.
That's what it's called, PPI.
The response I got was like, look, he's not ready right now. If we were like really PPI conscious, where that's going to play a role is in next spring. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely in the back of the mind. It's set up for him to win. So I don't think that's too. I think it's enough for the purpose of bold competition. You didn't say something like really like safe, like Martin Perez makes the starting rotation or something like that. So I think that's right on, while also being the just enough bit enough bold, because we haven't seen Colson thrive above, really, at least for his whole season, much above A ball. So it requires kind of seeing the tools really come into application. We've seen bits and starts. Obviously, he had 18 home runs last year. He flashed a lot of plus power. The exit velocity was a lot of very sexy, even while the contact issues weren't great last season. So he kind of matured into what he hadn't shown in games in previous seasons, while the other problems cropped up. But yeah, I think that's right on. Is this leading into me having to make a bold prediction?
No,
myself?
Not yet.
Okay.
We'll save you when we do our opening day eve show in March. We'll we'll ask for your bold prediction a day before opening day. So you can let that stew.
Okay.
Especially after what you watch in spring training in Arizona, and use that insight to help with your bold prediction. But
so instead of like saying Davis Martin All-Star game in January, I can wait till him to actually pitch well in spring training.
You can. You're not the only one. Herb Lawrence also picked Davis Martin to make the All-Star game on the show. I thought it was bold. For reference, John Triffin's bold prediction was that Tim Elko would eventually make the White Sox roster at some point this upcoming season and hit 10 homers for the White Sox in 2025. So for the Elko supporters, you got another fan on your bandwagon in John Triffin. He's a big Tim Elko guy.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free second look review. Second look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
And then finally, we got a chance to chat with Miguel Vargas. And you mentioned this before we got to SoxFest and the offseason episodes, James, that the White Sox wanted Vargas to bulk up in the offseason because his max exit velocity numbers with the White Sox, concerning. There was a drop-off from his time with the Dodgers over to the White Sox. And he was cold. Clearly, Miguel Vargas was cold. He was not comfortable with the weather. He was wearing many layers. That poor White Sox jersey was hanging on for dear life with the buttons. But does he look bulkier? I mean, he said that he gained, 20 pounds this offseason thanks to his mom's rice and beans?
Yeah, so, I mean, he taking it at his word. I mean, I knew the White Sox had, asked him to add weight. We have to get to Arizona, make sure he's not his offseason additions are not. He's not a sweater merchant. So he looked like at the Fan Fest, but the numbers were pretty plain as far as like he was hitting balls 110 with the Dodgers in April, and then by the end of the season, he can't crack 105, the White Sox, and I said it. It's hard to I don't know why anyone care when he's hitting like 102, but his chase numbers were as good as anybody on the team, and not just like, oh, the White Sox are bad, so leading them in chase rate is not good, but like they were legitimately very good. Now, obviously, if you're not a threat to pitchers in the zone, maybe there's not even as many chase pitches to really deal with, and I think that's probably a component of it, but it's something he's been good at throughout his minor league career. Especially since that year where he hurt his wrist and they just made him stand and not swing within Dodgers spring training. But you see him getting pitchers to throw him good pitches by fouling off stuff, by not chasing, and he would turn it and just it wouldn't go anywhere. He'd fly out to medium left. Even that like bomb he hit at Petco, like you see him like working the count and he gets this hanger and he launches it. It goods out, but then you look at the exit velocity numbers and it's like 98. It's like, all right, this guy just doesn't have the physical juice that he should. And he confirmed as much talking to us, like, yeah, I was not seeing the ball go as hard as I knew it could. I'd heard that his routine had gotten really thrown off by the trade, but he had lost like 15 pounds over the course of the year. He talked about how like training for different positions was kind of hectic for him as well, but it's good that he did this in the offseason. It's obviously progress. And, if he says that his exit velocity numbers have been going up, that's obviously a good sign too. Now, what the big question is whether we see it pay off in spring. And then the bigger question is like, all right, are the conditions that made you lose weight and lose power and lose strength over the course of the season unique to that situation of getting traded and all the hecticness in that? Or is there more something as far as your conditioning that's not allowing you to hold up over the course of the year? And that's something they kind of have to figure out over the course of the season. And it's kind of something they have to figure out in the major leagues because Miguel is out of options. And as much as you don't want to be beholden to playing someone who's not showing progress because otherwise you lose them, I think that is something that's got to affect the decision making. And, they have a lot of infielders and a lot of spots to kind of conjure with. You obviously want to play Brian Ramos a lot this year. Miguel did sound willing to play other places in third base, but do you wonder, like, if we move him around, it's going to cause more chaos and he's not going to be able to hold up? So it's still, this is good sign for him. It's still a very, very curious and tricky situation for giving this guy the proper runway for what you think is basically still a top 100 prospect who just hasn't been able to get, a sustained opportunity to prove himself. Or is this somebody who's just not producing and is older than some of the other candidates you have to become mainstays and you have to move on? So very, very curious to see Miguel Vargas throughout spring and this season.
Yeah, I think it's not certain that he's going to make the 26-man roster even without options, because there's also the defense at third base, and he needs to show Will Venable that defensively he can play a major league quality, at least average third base defense, because if he can, then okay, if Brooks Baldwin doesn't have a strong spring, if Lenine Sosa doesn't have a strong spring, if Jace Mydroth still needs more season in AAA, the White Sox can convince themselves, all right, Miguel Vargas can start the season as our opening day third baseman. Josh Rojas will start at second base. We should be fine and see where we're at and figure out 6 weeks later if Miguel Vargas is still a major leaguer. But if Vargas does not look good in spring training, James, like I could totally see the White Sox just cutting ties with him late in camp, giving him every opportunity to try to win a job. But I'm not even sure if you want him to be your DH if he shows struggles during spring training. Because again, I'm very much on the team. Put Andrew Benintendi as a DH, put somebody better defensively in left field camp, which that would also affect Vargas's chances of making the major league roster. So to your point, I agree with you. Miguel Vargas is someone that we're going to have to pay attention to and see how he's progressing during spring training. Because if he struggles, I don't think it's a guarantee that he makes the opening day roster for the Chicago White Sox. That brings us to our last topic of this episode, and that's the non-roster invitees. And this list continues to grow. The most recent non-roster invitee that the White Sox signed that was announced was James Karinchak, the former high-leverage reliever for the Cleveland Guardians, infamous as far as his comments, especially during the 2020 and 2021 season. Came out to Wild Thing, widely speculated, spider tech kind of guy, high fastball velocity, a wicked curveball, but he suffered through right shoulder inflammation during the 2024 season. Didn't pitch at all for the Guardians, was only limited to a few appearances at AAA where he was rehabbing with the Columbus team. His max fastball velocity, James, according to TrackMan, was what, 92.8 miles per hour from Karinchak?
92.8.
And that's concerning because he was usually at 94, 95, or even greater than 95 miles per hour. So if Karinchak goes into spring training and he's still sitting at 93 with a fastball velocity, I don't think he's any threat of making the major league roster. But James, when you look at the non-roster invitees that the Chicago White Sox are bringing in, somebody always finds a way to make the 26-man roster, whether injuries happen in spring training camp and the expected guys are not ready for opening day, so one of the non-roster invitees gets a major league contract and they join a team. So when you look at the list of non-roster invitees, and you can check this out on SoxMachine.com, Jim Margulis did a good job of breaking down, based on groups, of the types of non-roster invitees for the White Sox. Who do you like? Who has the best odds of making the opening day roster from the non-roster invitees?
Truly has the best odds is, probably something boring, well, not boring, but like Peyton Pallett could, make the opening day bullpen, I feel like. That it's someone I feel like is their best relief prospect as far as upper level at this point. Is stretched out inning wise, where you probably don't worry about him helming a 6-month season, at least not the way you would a normal rookie. But obviously someone like Dan Altavilla, who's pitched in the majors a lot and is pretty experienced. If he shows he's throwing strikes in camp and is healthy, that probably is like a safer call. I'd be really surprised if I think the natural structure for Bobby Dalbec is probably hitting pretty well in AAA, and a need arises and he fills it. But obviously that being someone that Ryan Fuller is really high on and involved in trying to acquire, and there's some sort of meaningful gain in his hit tool. Dalbec is the type of dude with the tools and his power in Arizona where if he's clicking, he probably looks like the best player ever for a couple of weeks. And you think well, how can we not go with this sort of dude? Omar Narvaez obviously has a good relationship with Walker McKinven. His framing really took off there. Probably one of the best years of his career was with Milwaukee. So that's someone to look at. And, Cal Mitchell is, if the battle for a fourth outfielder is a little bit weird or there's not a clear front, whether someone who's a veteran who's played at that level before is pretty good. And obviously either of the catching prospects, if there's an injury in front of them, I think has a pretty good chance of breaking. Don't know what his status is because he hasn't pitched since 2021 when he's a great rookie, but Chris Rodriguez, who was really good with the Angels in 2021, his agency said he just went on the White Sox. I don't even know if he's going to be Major League camp. He's dealt with shoulder stuff since then, but that's obviously someone who that's the sort of signing they should be making of someone who's been great in the past, but isn't healthy and, kind of take a risk, a swing if they are. That's probably, what you'd probably describe Karinchak as well. So it's certainly a roster where any kind of guy who's been a good major leaguer in the past and is now, went through injuries or something that delayed him and is back to being himself, shoots to the front of the line because that's not someone the White Sox are really thick on as far as we don't have a lot of late inning experience that James Karinchak probably doesn't have a long climb up the bullpen leverage ladder if he looks anything like his old self. And, probably same for Chris Rodriguez or even Dan Altavilla. They'd probably be like, well, he's pitched in the eighth before. More we can say for most of these guys. So I think bullpen is obviously usually the easiest way for anybody to sneak into. They don't have a ton of candidates like that. And, Ethan Katz kind of hinted that probably some of the people who lose out on a rotation spot are going to be in the open day bullpen. So maybe some of the 40-man, not on this NRI list, starter candidates, if you're wondering what becomes of Nick Nastrini, maybe that transition happens in spring just because of the level of openings and availabilities there are. So it's definitely, and I think this is something strangely, I wouldn't feel this way because I would love job security, but a lot of players have talked about, and Garrett Crochet talked about his way out, is that he felt like last spring was absolutely merit-based. Easy for Garrett to feel that way because he feels like he pitched his way into being the opening day starter when he started out not in the rotation, but they enjoyed the feel that everything was just an open competition. Everybody won their spot. And I think if anything, this camp is oriented to be that way more than ever. And it feels like that's from 20 years ago where we'd actually have to watch spring training to figure out who's going to make the team. But this is, because of the state of the roster, probably more oriented to be that sort of spring training that you really there's purpose to watching the games or following results or seeing how guys are playing, because it's not, no one really should have a guaranteed slot other than Luis Robert, Andrew Benintendi, Andrew Vaughn, Jonathan Cannon. There's very few people who feel like they already have their locker space mapped out in Chicago already.
Yeah, they either have home set up or they can feel confident that at least during the regular season, they will be living in Chicago for most of the time. Yeah, I agree with you on the bullpen. The bullpen seems to be a wide open competition for the Chicago White Sox heading into spring training, which is not that many days away. Again, thank you to our Patreon supporters and for everyone that supports, that reads and listens to all of our work on SoxMachine.com. James will be at spring training camp covering the White Sox down there for us at Sox Machine. We greatly appreciate your guys' support in those efforts. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You could also listen and watch the show on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. We'll continue to post our video highlights of our footage and coverage of SoxFest and an opportunity to talk to many of the White Sox players, especially young prospects. You can check out those future videos on YouTube. You can also follow us on social media. We're on all the platforms at Sox Machine. You can follow James at JR Fegan. You can follow me at SoxMachine_Josh. If you enjoy our work and want full access to all of our coverage of the Chicago White Sox and Major League Baseball, you can sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine. Monthly plans start at $5. You get ad-free versions of both the website and the podcast. We also have additional tiers with additional benefits. So again, if you would like to support Sox Machine, go to patreon.com/Sox Machine to sign up. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.
The NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.